Welcome to The Critique. We're diving into a really fascinating submission, a commentary script analyzing the conflict between Tim Pool and Candace Owens.
Yeah, it's got everything. PSYOPs, time travel, the MAGA movement fracturing.
It really does. So let's just get right to work. Okay, so a key theme running through this obviously is the PSYOP, but the argumentation around that central thesis, well, it could use some untangling. It requires a much more linear synthesis of the definitions being used. Otherwise, the listener's just going to get lost. The weakness, as I see it, is really a structural confusion.
Okay.
The script just toggles back and forth between two very different ideas of what this PSYOP is.
Without signaling the shift.
Exactly. So on one hand, you've got Tim Pool's definition, which is that it's all a big distraction, right?
Right. To make the populist right look foolish, ignore the real issues like borders, manufacturing.
And then the narrator brings in their own definition, which is more about this technical algorithmic manipulation.
By radical leftists and bot farms on X.
Yeah, and right now those two angles are just interwoven almost randomly. It muddies the water.
Okay, but I'm going to push back a little. Is that necessarily a weakness for this audience?
How so?
I mean, we're talking about internet political commentary. It's often high energy, a bit scattergun.
True.
So why force a linear structure on something that's meant to feel chaotic? Maybe the confusion is part of the point.
That is a fair question. And look, if this were maybe, some kind of performance art, I might agree.
But it's not.
It's persuasive commentary. The subject can be chaos, but the analysis of that chaos has to be orderly.
Or you lose your authority.
You lose all authority. Think of it like the pyramid principle. You start with the answer, then your arguments support it. Here, the writer is mixing the why, the distraction, with the how, the algorithms, on the same level.
Which creates a lot of cognitive load for the listener.
A ton. They spend all their energy trying to figure out who we're even talking about.
I see what you mean. So by conflating the motive with the mechanism, the listener loses track of who the antagonist actually is.
Exactly.
Is it Candace Owens herself, or is it the platforms that are boosting her?
Right. If you treat them as the same thing or swap them without warning, you lose all the nuance.
So what's the fix?
The suggestion is to structure the argument hierarchically. You need to stack these points.
For a fact.
Yes. Start with the intent, Tim Pool's view on distraction. Then you introduce the mechanism, the narrator's algorithm theory. And then finally, you synthesize them.
Into a unified theory of controlled opposition.
Okay, so let's get concrete. How do we rewrite that? How do you build that bridge?
Without losing the energy of the piece.
You do it with explicit signposts. You could have a line in the middle section like, Tim argues the goal is distraction from manufacturing and borders. However, I believe the method being used to achieve this is the algorithm. You see?
You're separating the what from the how.
Exactly. And then you bring in the evidence, the 80,000 new subs versus the bot farms.
So that links the intent to the method.
It turns two separate rants into one cohesive argument.
That makes sense. But let's be honest, perfect structure doesn't save a script if the vibe is off.
Which brings us right to our second point, the tone. Let's talk about the section on the subject's character. The reliance on pejorative epithets and just, insults. It really diminishes the analytical authority of the piece.
It risks alienating people, too.
Big time. Especially listeners who are looking for a serious debunking. The weakness here is, it's pretty glaring.
Okay.
The script uses insults like dingbat, wackaloon, nut jobs, and it even uses an offensive slur.
I saw that. Yeah, the R slur.
And while you can feel the writer's passion, this kind of language, it just shifts the whole genre.
From political analysis to
an angry diary entry, basically.
But hang on. What about the target audience here? Is the goal to persuade people on the fence?
Or is it just a vent to the converted?
Right, because calling someone a narcissistic, psychopathic dingbat might feel pretty cathartic for the writer?
Sure.
Is there a risk that if we sanitize the language, we strip away the raw authenticity that people like about independent media?
That's the classic trap, isn't it? But let's look at it through ethos, pathos, logo.
Okay.
When you use a slur or a childish insult like dingbat, you might hit the pathos, the emotion, for your hardcore fan.
But you're nuking your ethos.
You are absolutely nuking your credibility with everyone else. If your goal is to convince a neutral person that the subject is irrational,
you can't use irrational insults yourself.
It completely undermines your goal. Neutral listeners just tune out. They see the narrator as emotionally compromised. You have to sound like the sane one in the room.
So it just becomes a wash. You sound as volatile as the person you're criticizing.
Precisely. And about the R slur used for the people who backed her, that just has to go.
Immediately.
And not just because it's offensive, but because it's lazy writing. It tells the listener nothing about why those people are wrong.
Okay, so if we're taking out the dingbats and the slurs, what goes in their place? How do you keep the punch without the poison?
The suggestion is to replace the personal insults with descriptions of the consequences of the behavior.
Ah, I see.
You let the absurdity of the claims serve as the indictment, not the labels you're applying. You show, you don't just tell.
That's great. Let's do a concrete example. Instead of calling followers delusional dingbats,
Which is easy to just dismiss, right?
you could describe them as what? Uncritically accepting unverified sci-fi tropes?
Yes, that's so much stronger. It's a specific, intellectual critique.
And for the other personalities, instead of the slur.
Describe them as professionally compromised or credibility damaged.
I like that.
And you can lean harder into that contrast the script mentions, the Dairy Queen versus time travel idea.
Right.
You don't need to call anyone names to show that believing a commentator is a time traveler is absurd. The facts do the heavy lifting.
That actually transitions us perfectly. We've cleaned up the structure, we've elevated the tone, but now we have to deal with the elephant in the room. Or maybe the alien in the room?
Right. Which brings us to critique point number 3, the logical core.
The actual claims.
The logical deconstruction of the specific theories, especially the Charlie Kirk is a time traveler theory, it really should be the centerpiece of the critique, not a passing reference. The weakness here is that the script, it mentions the time traveler accusation, it mentions the text messages.
It touches on the logic of it briefly.
Very briefly, about going back in time to stop your own death, but then it pivots right back to general statements about the subject being crazy. And that leaves the most compelling evidence, the sheer logical impossibility of it, completely underdeveloped. The writer has absolute gold with this time travel claim.
But they're just throwing it on the pile with everything else.
Exactly. Instead of dissecting it like the gift it is.
But is it really worth the time? I mean, isn't there a risk that by engaging so deeply with a theory that silly?
You dignify it.
You dignify it, yeah.
Please. Dismissing it as crazy is the right move. Why spend 3 minutes on a sci-fi plot and a political script?
Because that's where the reductio ad absurdum comes in.
Explain that.
If you just dismiss it, you're just saying, I don't believe you. But if you take it seriously, if you mockingly treat it as a real proposition...
You expose the rot at the core of the argument.
Exactly. The scriptless movies like The Matrix, I, Robot, Terminator. This is a golden opportunity to surgically dismantle those tropes that the writer mentions but doesn't really analyze.
So it's not just that she's watching too many movies, it's that she is substituting movie plots for political analysis.
Precisely. The suggestion is to expand on that grandfather paradox argument that's hinted at.
Okay.
Treat the claim with a kind of mock seriousness to expose how flawed it is. For anyone who doesn't know, that's the puzzle where if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, you're never born to do it.
Right. So apply that here.
If Charlie Kirk is a time traveler sent to save the country, and the country is where it is now,
He's a pretty bad time traveler.
he's a terrible time traveler. I mean, frankly, if I could time travel, stopping a podcast host wouldn't be my first priority.
I'd probably go for the lottery numbers.
Right? And that's the point. By walking through it logically, the absurdity becomes so much funnier and more damning than just screaming, "That's crazy."
Okay, let's get into the weeds here with a concrete example. The script mentions Charlie Kirk taking the red pill. We see that everywhere. How do we dismantle that?
You suggest a section that explicitly contrasts the plot of The Matrix with reality.
Okay.
You could say, in The Matrix, the red pill reveals a machine-run dystopia. In this context, taking the red pill just seems to mean disagreeing with the host about tax policy.
You deflate the grandeur of the metaphor.
Totally. And what about the text messages about being an alien? The writer says, it was probably a joke. That's weak.
It's an assertion, not an argument.
The fix is to show, don't tell. Detail why it was likely a jest. Analyze the context. Was there an emoji? What was the tone? Prove it was a joke through textual analysis.
So you win by being the better reader of reality.
That's how you do it.
Okay, that makes sense. You're basically doing literary analysis on a political feud.
Yes.
But now, the ending. The script wraps up with a lot of numbers.
Yes. Our fourth point, the metrics, the inclusion of channel metrics and viewership stats. It really needs to be tied more directly to the central thesis of truth versus sensationalism.
To be relevant to the listener.
Right. The weakness is that the script spends a good chunk of time comparing Timcast IRL growth what was it, 80K new subs a month?
And the Storybox views at 1 million a month.
Right, and it compares that against the decline of others. As it's written, this feels like a humble brag.
It reads like, she's crazy, and by the way, my numbers are great.
Exactly. It doesn't actually support the PSYOP theory. It feels like an ego stroke.
That's a critical point. But I wonder, has the writer established a clear link between telling the truth and gaining subscribers?
That's the question.
Because if the PSYOP is real, and the algorithms are designed by radical leftists to boost lies, why are the truth tellers growing?
You hit the nail on the head. There's a contradiction there.
A big one.
If the bad guys control the algorithm, why is Tim Pool gaining 80,000 subscribers? If you don't address that, the listener just leaves confused.
So how do we resolve that without just deleting the stats? Because they are impressive. They do add credibility if you use them right.
The suggestion is to use the metrics to prove the resilience of the audience against the alleged PSYOP.
Ah, okay.
Frame the growth numbers as evidence that the distraction strategy is failing.
Not just that the host is popular.
The numbers shouldn't be about vanity. They should be about the failure of the controlled opposition.
Let's try to verbalize that. How do we rewrite that section instead of just ending with a pat on the back for 1 million views?
You rewrite it to frame that number as data. Data proving the market demand for sanity. You could say something like, the fact that this channel is getting 1 million views a month proves that the MAGA movement prefers the real fight, borders, manufacturing, over the sci-fi mystery box being offered by the opposition.
That's good. It shifts the focus from I'm popular to the audience is smart.
Exactly. It aligns the channel's stats with a political argument about Trump and the populist right.
So it turns the metrics into a weapon for the argument, not a resume for the host.
It finally answers the so what question. Why do these numbers matter? Because they prove the PSYOP isn't working.
That really ties the whole script together. You go from the argument structure to the tone to the logic and then finally to the proof in the data.
That's the goal. So let's just quickly recap the main points of the critique so the listener has a clear roadmap.
Okay.
First, streamline the PSYOP definition. Clearly distinguish between the intent to distract and the mechanism of the algorithm. Use signposts.
Remember the pyramid principle.
Second, elevate the tone. This one's non-negotiable. Remove the pejoratives and the slur. They diminish your credibility. Let the facts be the insult.
And third, deepen that logical takedown of the sci-fi claims. Don't just call the time travel theory insane.
Use the grandfather paradox. Contrast movie plots with reality. Make it fun, but make it rigorous.
And finally, align the viewership metrics with the core political argument.
Use that subscriber growth to prove that the audience is rejecting the distraction. It resolves the contradiction.
I really feel like if the writer makes these changes, they go from a ranty YouTube video to a piece of genuine political commentary.
Something that could actually change minds. Absolutely. We would love to see a revised draft of this script. Focus on the logical dismantling over the emotional reaction, and you'll have a much more persuasive piece. Please submit your work back in again for more feedback.
Thanks for listening to The Critique.